2013, Tempe, Arizona. The desert heat lingered over the city in the early hours, a low, oppressive hum beneath the streetlights. Adrienne Salinas, 19, a student at Gateway Community College, left a party just before dawn on June 15th, carrying an overnight bag and a sense of quiet determination. She spoke with a cab driver, arranging a pickup at a nearby convenience store. That call, brief and unremarkable, marked the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. Within 14 minutes, she would vanish entirely. Her phone would die. Surveillance cameras would catch fleeting images of a shadow, and the streets would keep their silence. 2 months later, her remains would emerge in the desert wash near Apache Junction, carried there by forces no one could fully trace. Adrienne's story is one of fleeting movement, fractured time, and the cold calculus of absence. Follow the case as we trace her final steps and subscribe to uncover the fragments of a life interrupted. The initial response to Adrienne Salinas' disappearance was immediate but fragmented. Her father, Rick Salinas, reported her missing on the afternoon of June 16th. Following her failure to check in on Father's Day, Tempe police began a methodical sweep of her neighborhood, canvassing her apartment complex and questioning residents. Investigators interviewed her roommates Shani Duggan and Rebecca Flores, who recounted seeing Adrienne leave their apartment with an overnight bag, intending to visit her boyfriend's apartment in Scottsdale. Witness statements provided consistency, but the lack of direct observation of her movements after leaving the building created a critical gap. Francisco Arteaga, her boyfriend, offered precise accounts of the preceding night, the argument at the party, the short drive to his apartment, Adrienne's insistence on leaving, and her subsequent return to her own residence. Arteaga's timeline suggested that Adrienne was seen getting out of his car at approximately 3:22 a.m., a point corroborated by phone calls he placed to her roommates requesting they monitor her return. Investigators documented the sequence meticulously, logging timestamps, call records, and the minimal traffic along the street. Where she was last seen, that the first tangible clue arrived in the form of Adrienne's abandoned vehicle, found roughly 2 blocks from the initial accident site near Ash Avenue and Rio Salado Parkway. The car had 2 flat tires. A BlackBerry phone and a notebook were discovered inside, photographed, and secured as evidence. Notably, her cell phone was missing from the vehicle. Investigators catalogued the items using standard forensic procedures, photographing every angle, logging serial numbers, and noting fingerprints. The absence of her phone became a central issue. It had the potential to reveal her precise movements during those final 14 minutes. Police interviewed Thomas Simon, Jr., the cab driver who Adrienne called just before vanishing, and his father, Thomas Simon, Sr., owner of Scottsdale Cab Guy. Simon, Jr.'s account was procedural. He arrived at the agreed location, contacted Adrienne, and received confirmation that she was almost there. She never appeared. Attempts to reach her phone failed. The device had been turned off around 5:07 a.m. Surveillance footage from a nearby O'Reilly Auto Parts captured the outline of a young woman matching her description walking along the street, yet the imagery offered no clarity on her ultimate direction. Searches extended beyond the immediate vicinity. Tempe Town Lake was canvassed using sonar equipment. Nearby streets and alleys were checked for signs of struggle. Canvassing parties spoke to potential witnesses, but no new leads emerged. The lack of surveillance coverage and minimal pedestrian traffic compounded the difficulty. Investigators moved with deliberate caution, recording each step, each interview, cataloging potential timelines in spreadsheets. A reward was posted, first modest, then increasing to $10,000 in an effort to incentivize information from the community. Forensic teams analyzed the vehicle and the notebook, noting partial fingerprints, remnants of dried mud, and a faint smell of gasoline. Investigators speculated on the accident Adrienne had earlier that morning, considering the possibility of disorientation or stress impacting her movements. Every detail was cross-referenced: phone logs, vehicle location, witness statements, and timing of calls. The case file grew dense, yet the central mystery persisted. How had Adrienne disappeared in a 14-minute window under the scrutiny of multiple contacts and locations? Amidst the technical documentation, a mid-layer of anxiety pervaded the investigation. Detectives encouraged the public to examine surveillance footage, share memories of the party, and comment with any information, even seemingly insignificant observations, believing that minute details could shift the case forward. The early investigation was marked by procedural rigor and cold uncertainty, a methodical attempt to trace the trajectory of a life abruptly halted. As the investigation unfolded, the ordinary details of Adrienne's disappearance began to take on an unsettling quality. The AM/PM convenience store, where she was expected to meet the cab, revealed nothing in its surveillance footage: no movement, no reflection of her presence at the crucial moment. Investigators noted a subtle inconsistency. One frame showed a shadowed figure near the street, yet it did not match the trajectory expected from phone location data. The footage itself seemed to freeze in its own rhythm, a slight static ripple that was dismissed as camera glitch, but lingered in the memories of those who reviewed it repeatedly. Reports emerged of strange disturbances along the desert routes near Apache Junction, locations later connected to the eventual discovery of Adrienne's remains. Ranchers described sudden interference on handheld radios, devices that had functioned normally minutes before. Compasses swung erratically, briefly pointing in directions that defied the local geomagnetic expectations. Investigators recorded these anomalies, cataloging them as environmental oddities, yet they remained unexplained, forming a quiet backdrop to the search. Footprints were discovered near washes leading into dry creek beds, sometimes stopping abruptly, sometimes overlapping in ways that suggested movement against prevailing wind and sand patterns. Despite meticulous measurement and comparison, the prints could not be conclusively tied to Adrienne or any other known person. Search teams encountered desert vegetation flattened in seemingly deliberate paths, dust patterns that did not align with vehicular traffic, and the occasional presence of scavenger birds congregating over areas previously untroubled. Maps and GPS logs of volunteers showed small, sudden deviations in recorded paths, coordinates shifting in ways that did not correspond with physical movement. Each irregularity was noted and archived, a growing record of unexplained inconsistencies. Even within the city, peculiar reports surfaced. Calls placed to the Tempe Police Department from concerned citizens noted seeing a young woman resembling Adrienne near West 5th Street, only for the individual to vanish before contact. Investigators reviewed these accounts with caution, yet patterns were difficult to define, offering only more questions than answers. Each strange occurrence, though isolated, compounded the overall mystery, layering the disappearance with tension that was both procedural and inexplicable. For those following the investigation, the anomalies were as compelling as the known facts. Viewers and community members were urged to engage, to like and share information they might hold, creating a broader net of observation in hopes of capturing even the smallest thread that could connect. Adrienne's final movements. Amid the sterile lines of reports and time, Adrienne Salinas was more than a sequence of calls and sightings. She was 19, a student at Gateway Community College, known to her friends and family as intelligent, deliberate, and quietly spirited. Her father, Rick, often described her as motivated, responsible, and loving a young woman who had a particular fondness for movies, books, and the small moments that made life feel tethered to warmth and familiarity. A tattoo of a sun rested just below her left ear, a small but deliberate emblem, mirrored by a lip piercing with a clear stone. These details, seemingly minor in investigative files, carried a personal resonance for those who knew her intimately. Her last hours were traced meticulously. She left a party in the early morning hours of June 15, 2013. After an argument with her boyfriend, Francisco Arteaga, witnesses remembered her as quiet, intent on her decisions, gathering her overnight bag as though preparing for a journey no one would observe. She spoke to Francisco repeatedly between 4:10 a.m. and 4:45 a.m., expressing her intention to come over an ordinary plan that ended in extraordinary disappearance. That night, she placed a call to a cab service, arranging a pickup at the corner of Hardy Drive and University Drive. She spoke calmly, stating she would arrive imminently, yet she never appeared. The discovery of her car 2 days later, abandoned with 2 flat tires, added to the human narrative. Inside a notebook and her phone, or what remained of it, hinted at the fragments of ordinary life interrupted. The notebook, photographed and returned to her parents, became a silent witness to her thoughts, her routines, and the potential fears that remained unspoken. The loss of the phone, the disruption of planned communications, left a tangible absence in the lives of those who waited, unaware of the finality awaiting them in the desert 2 months later. Friends and family remembered her voice, her humor, her attentiveness, and the comfort of small routines. Francisco's recollections were particularly stark. He described Adrienne as his closest confidant, the only girl he had ever loved, emphasizing the human void left behind by her disappearance. Each belonging, each trace of her presence, reinforced the duality of the case. A missing young woman known intimately to her circle, yet whose final movements and fate were obscured in shadows of ambiguity. The discovery of Adrienne's remains on August 6, 2013, beneath a wash of silt and debris in Apache Junction, introduced a new layer of complexity to the investigation. Floodwaters had swept the area on July 21, 2013, creating a scenario in which her body was displaced from its original location. Investigators had to reconcile the environmental factors with the limited physical evidence recovered. The autopsy returned inconclusive results, listing both cause and manner of death as undetermined. This lack of clarity was a haunting feature in an otherwise meticulous case, leaving law enforcement and family members suspended in uncertainty. Conflicting metadata in surveillance footage emerged as a point of interest. The AM/PM convenience store footage from June 15 was scrutinized repeatedly. Timestamps suggested gaps, and frames did not align perfectly with phone call records. Investigators attempted to overlay phone logs, cab driver timelines, and eyewitness statements, but anomalies persisted. Even minor discrepancies became critical in reconstructing the narrow 14-minute window between Adrienne's last known communication and the moment her phone was switched off. Radio logs, police surveillance notes, and early interviews introduced further contradictions. While Thomas Simon Jr., the cab driver, was cleared of suspicion, His repeated interviews and the surveillance of his movements exposed subtle inconsistencies in reported events. These inconsistencies were not definitive evidence but underscored the challenges investigators faced when piecing together fragmented human memory against an unforgiving landscape. The location of discovery itself posed questions. The desert basin, remote yet traversed by local traffic, suggested deliberate placement or abandonment. Debris patterns and the accumulation of silt indicated natural movement, but the origin point remained speculative. No suspect was identified with certainty, and no definitive motive was established. Each new detail layered ambiguity upon ambiguity, leaving the case unresolved yet increasingly documented in forensic precision. As investigators pieced together these fragments, the case became a tapestry of near certainties and persistent unknowns. Every observation invited scrutiny, every contradiction a door to further inquiry. The desert, indifferent and expansive, held its secrets tightly, leaving Adrienne's story suspended between human reconstruction and environmental interference. If you have insights or thoughts about the narrow window of Adrienne's disappearance, comment below. Your perspective could illuminate details that have remained obscured for over a decade. Adrienne Salinas' case remains a ghostly presence in the Arizona desert. Despite extensive investigation, surveillance, interviews, and the painstaking cataloging of evidence, no one has been charged in connection with her death. Her story is preserved in fragments, phone records that end abruptly, surveillance footage that captures absence rather than presence, and a body carried by waters to a place far from the life she had known. Family and friends continue to hope, but the passage of time has layered uncertainty over memory. Each recollection, each interview, is filtered through grief and conjecture. Investigators note the environmental variables, the wash of floodwaters, the shifting desert terrain, the subtle inconsistencies in timelines, all complicating an already narrow window of disappearance. There is no definitive answer, no satisfying resolution, only the cold documentation of what was and what remains unknowable. Some details persist as faint anomalies. The 14-minute window in which Adrienne vanished, the misplaced phone, the uncorroborated sightings, and the conflicting metadata in surveillance footage. Each is a whisper of the life interrupted, a signal that does not resolve, a puzzle that remains half-assembled. These elements, mundane yet eerie, continue to draw both professionals and amateurs to examine, question, and speculate. Subscribe to follow the investigation, to witness how small inconsistencies and overlooked fragments may yet reveal truths. The desert holds its secrets, and some nights, when the wind sweeps across the silted basin, it seems to murmur of unanswered questions, of a young woman taken too soon, and of the 14 minutes that defined the unknown. Adrienne Salinas is gone, but the silence she left behind continues to speak.